All right. Great to see you all again. Can we take our seats?
Kindly settle down. Those who are still here, settle down. Like I mentioned, Riham is just handling the Riyadh Declaration. She'll be back with us in just a bit. So for the rest of us, we can settle down. Thank you.
Should we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So thank you all for sitting in to this presentation. This is something very close to my heart, and I think the whole aspect of carbon markets is very close to all our hearts sitting here. But I think in particular because, when my colleague Nikki Coleman told me to do a presentation, I thought of this topic because coming from the global south, I'm based out of India. I think what is very important is that when we talk about carbon prices, the context is very important. One of the things which Musab mentioned from Aramco in his last remarks was that 80% of the crude that Aramco sells goes to the global south. And therefore, we live in economies where every day we worry about the oil price, we worry about the gas price, we worry about the coal price. And then, with the new reality of climate change and the energy transition, we need to think about a carbon price. And a carbon price based for a commodity which, we talked about this earlier this morning, that it's a commodity which is an abstraction, a chemical abstraction. It's not something like oil I can see, I can put into my fuel tank. It's not something I can see whether it's coal or gas. So it really poses a challenge for the policymaker, the regulator, the planner, the strategist, the CEO. You name any stakeholder we are trying to bring into this room about how to triangulate this whole, to me, a triangle of price, cost, and value. And that's what I hope to unpack with you today. When we look at sort of those three sides of that triangle, what is the value of carbon? What is the price of carbon? What is the cost of carbon? The three questions that come up is, what is the value of carbon? And I think the value of carbon is very intricately linked to the value of carbon as a tool for development. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole argument of climate justice is all about allowing the global south to use some more carbon to develop. And at the same time, the same global south, and of course the global north, also talk about the value of clean air. Coming from the global south, I also live in a city where we're approaching a season where there have been right to breathe protests. There have been right to clean air. The consciousness of right to clean air has risen because this is where, in the global south, you see local air pollution issues and climate change issues collide. So when we talk about climate change, we're talking at a much more macro level. When we talk about local air pollution, it is a daily affair. It is about, coming from Delhi, we actually have a term called the Delhi lung, right? And the Delhi lung means that I probably have a chance of developing some pulmonary issues over time in my life. So the value of carbon and the value of clean air, how will they be priced in, is a key question. What is the cost basis? So when we're looking at the solutions to mitigate climate change, what is the cost basis? What is a reference basis which we often talk about in terms of marginal cost abatement curves? And this is where we see that you can talk about a range of clean, low-carbon decarbonization technologies, right from $10 a ton to more than $250 a ton. And you've heard the ranges of carbon prices that we have talked about in the voluntary market, in the compliance market as well, and my colleague Sylvia will also go into it. And finally, where does this value-cost equation equilibrate to give us a carbon price? And within that carbon price are also further complexities about avoidance, about reduction. And ultimately, that is my main question, that we come from markets where you're talking about an overall market size of 1.5 billion customers, approximately. in such areas, is the consumer willing to pay? And this is an important political economy question, because if the consumer is not going to pay, no matter what you do, it's not going to work, right? And so it'll be interesting. To me, this is a trilemma which has these aspects of price, value, and cost acting on a commodity which is not very fathomable to some extent, but it has a huge aspect of value linked to its uses, but also linked to just the quality of life, so both quality of life and development. So if I were to, enunciate what is that role of carbon price, that we still need carbon pricing. I may say that today an oil price is more important than a carbon price in the global south, but what is the role of carbon pricing? It is a critical tool towards net zero. And whether we argue that the global north will achieve net zero in 2050 and the global south will achieve net zero in 2060, 70, 2065, the reality is that we need a carbon price to incentivize to reduce emissions. We need a carbon price to encourage investments in low-carbon technologies. We need a carbon price to facilitate international cooperation to reduce those emissions. We need a carbon price to generate revenues for sustainable investments. I think Riham spoke about this earlier, that how can the carbon price and voluntary carbon markets be a mechanism to also channelize finances to projects which otherwise would be uneconomic, would not be developed. And ultimately encourage innovation in clean energy technologies for a better future. What are the different types of carbon prices? So broadly speaking, there is direct carbon pricing and there's indirect carbon pricing. Under the direct mechanisms, you have a mix of voluntary and the compliance market. So you have mechanisms like the EU ETS, you have the compliance market in China, the compliance market in Korea. There's a new compliance market coming up in India, in Singapore, which comes under the more cap-and-trade system of ETS. We also have one in California. Then there is a more direct form, which is carbon taxes. You'll see a lot of I think American companies prefer that when they look at what should governments do around the world, because it's very clear. I have a tax to pay. I may not like to pay a tax, but it's very clear how much tax I need to budget for in any transaction. Then carbon credits. This is the whole voluntary market that we've been talking about today. And indirect is policies. So again, this is where fuel excise taxes come in, sales taxes, VAT come in. And this is generally a toolkit for the policymaker to change behaviors. So if diesel taxation goes up in India and coal taxation goes up in India, I may prefer a cleaner natural gas vehicle. That is in an indirect form, working through the policy mechanism. And the second indirect form is shadow pricing. I find that interesting because that is an acknowledgement by companies, so really the supply side of the end of the market, to acknowledge that when I'm going to choose a project to fund in my project stage gate processes, I will make sure that I've incorporated I've imputed a price for carbon and put it into my decision matrix. So when we looked at some of the large energy companies, international and national oil companies, what we see is that the major oil and gas companies, if you average it out, incorporate today in their stage gate processes a carbon price of about $52 per CO2. That means if they're going to choose between project A and project B, all else equal, they will be putting in this carbon price, and it will factor into the ultimate returns and selection equation. If you were to convert that carbon price to what does it mean in terms of additional cost over and above, say, a planning price for oil, it would amount to about $24 to $39 per barrel of crude oil. So that is what companies are already incorporating. So that, this, if you see, one narrative you hear a lot from the international oil companies is we don't know where to invest. The reason we don't know where to invest is because our thresholds for projects are rising because of internal shadow pricing. And then I think I've shared a lot about, what are the different aspects about this value, price, cost equation. But again, to reiterate, in the absence of a price discovery mechanism, which is clear, transparent, verifiable, creditable, which is a work in progress, the cost of carbon reduction, the cost of abatement, the marginal abatement curves for technologies like hydrogen, carbon capture, renewables, battery storage will become very important to provide a reference basis. So when you start pricing the cost of carbon, at first you'll have to get a sense of what is that cost could look like, at least from the producer angle, from the angle of bringing it in to the equation of a policymaker. And ultimately, it will get priced in, of course, through a mix of price discovery mechanisms, which will then feed into project selection. But this is really going to be a circular process over the next several decades. I think we've talked a lot about the issues on the Global South, and I think one thing to bear in mind is that there are very stark differences between the Global North and South in terms of the price of carbon, which tends to be higher in the Global North than the Global South. The Global South is still in very early stages of development of this understanding between the price of carbon and the mechanisms to price in carbon, and also the fact that people are still not thinking as much, though there is a value on clean air, are not being able to put it back into the equation for the consumer especially, who will not bear this higher cost, who will not let this cost be passed through to them. The second aspect is the cost of carbon reduction. We're also seeing with policies like the climate legislation in the US, the IRA, the European Green Deal, the Global North is actually a hub for technological innovation. This is not to say that the Global South does not innovate, but I think the scale, the piloting, the ecosystems of innovation appear to be a little more developed in the Global North right now, and the Global South becomes more reliant on technology transfer and international finance. I mean, the classic $100 billion question that the Global North has promised $100 billion of climate finance to flow through the Global South, and that's still been coming in the last few years. And then ultimately, in terms of value of carbon reduction, again, it appears that there are more resources in the Global North to develop these clean technologies, and the Global South, as we've spoken before, I think in the earlier panel with Mariam as well, that the Global South is much more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So there are these dichotomies where there is more impacts we are seeing potentially in the Global South, where the communities are more vulnerable, but at the same time, the flow of finance, the flow of technology is not at the pace that is required, and this ultimately feeds into the carbon pricing mechanism, whether you see it through the voluntary markets, or to some extent, I would argue, even in the compliance markets. This is just to share with you that we, in S&P Global, we do a lot of work in the basis of developing scenarios. So we have 5 scenarios in which we divide the world. So we have something called inflections. These are the tables at the bottom. Inflections is more of a base case world, more of the same. Green rules is an accelerated green world where the intent to be more green is possible. The external shocks are lesser. Discord is a world, I would argue, is where the world is in a form of free fall. You see more wars, you see more barriers of trade barriers coming up, and you see the inability to really accelerate the green ambitions. And this is also a world, what we call the discord world, where when there are more discord between nations in various ways, manifesting in various ways, countries typically tend to go back to the lowest cost fuels. And when you go back to the lowest cost fuels, you do see the reemergence of coal. You do see the reemergence of biomass unabated. And ultimately, there are two more which are out there green technology scenarios, the ACCS, which is the Accelerated Carbon Capture and Storage scenario, and the MTM, which is the Multi-Tech Mitigation scenario. The main point of this is that we believe that these curves that you are seeing indicate that carbon prices have to rise a lot. And going up to 2050, there will be convergence to some range of up to about $300 a ton. That is where we need to get to. That is where we will most likely get to. This is another view on how carbon prices are right now in different countries. And this is a mix of the ETS and carbon taxes. And what we see here is that most of the countries which are in the global north, we see much higher carbon prices. In the center is a band which we've put called the Carbon Price Corridor. This comes out of a 2017 landmark paper by Joseph Stiglitz and Nicholas Stern, where they talked about what will it take, what carbon prices do we need to have for a net zero future. And that range was $61 to $122 in 2023 prices. So that's really that range, and you see, most countries don't fall in that range. So we're not where we need to be to incentivize a cleaner future. And the other important thing to bear in mind is that less than 5% of GHG emissions are today covered by a direct carbon price at or above that range recommended by 2030. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Sylvia to share what we do in the world of carbon market indices and the whole breadth of indices that we have. If there are any questions, maybe we can both take it in the end, or if you'd like any questions right now. In the end is fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm aware that you probably have an overload of information right now, so I'll try to keep this quite fast and not to focus too much on details because we're already running out of time, but please do come to me if you want to go in the depth of what I'm showing you. So I am leading the team that is in charge of putting a price on carbon credits. So my team is made of reporters like myself, and what we do is to talk every day to market participants. So we talk to the project developers, the traders, the brokers, the end buyers, and we want to collect price information. So understanding at which price carbon credits are exchanging hands every day. So we want to find those bids, those offers, and the traded value of credits. We collect this information, we publish it as soon as we receive it, and then we elaborate it to come up every day with a price assessment. Now, the voluntary carbon market presents unique challenges when it comes to pricing. I wanted to use this space to show you the challenges that we had to face and the solutions that we found to address these challenges. Which one? Oh. Okay, wrong way around. So these are not my slides.
Keep going, keep going.
All right, this is it. Sorry about that. Okay, and you have my details here if it's needed. All right, so first of all, what is S&P Global Commodity Insight? We aim to provide benchmarks, so price assessment that can be used by a huge number of stakeholders out there for different reasons. We do this across different commodity markets. We have a global benchmark for Brent, which is the reason why people usually know our name, Platts. And what we do is to provide references that can be used by market participants, so buyers, sellers, and traders, to inform their negotiations, but also put a price in the contracts. Of course, we offer information to risk managers, analysts, but also governments and commodity exchanges and financial institutions in general. What makes a good benchmark? There are few important characteristics that need to be respected as a price reporting agencies in order to provide valuable information. One of those is the granularity of information. I mentioned before that we aim to collect price information every day from market participants. This information needs to be granular enough and wide enough to ensure that we're really capturing the market value of credits. But then another important element is integrity and impartiality. We have a lot of guidelines internally that make sure that our price assessments are not influenced by anyone, and most importantly, they're not influenced by the buyers of our own products. I had a slide prepared on this, but unfortunately it didn't make it through the final deck. But I wanted to touch on these points because it's quite important. Okay, this is the slide that should not be there. Okay. All right. As I said before, like the voluntary carbon market poses unique challenges, and even a company like Platts that has been assessing the price of commodity markets for decades has found a few challenges in here. The main reason is the heterogeneity of this commodity. This is a chart that is commonly used to categorize the huge variety of carbon credits that you find out there. You would divide them in avoidance on the one end, removal on the other one, and then again in tech-based and nature-based for both main baskets. But you can see these are just some of the carbon projects that we see out there and the credits that they produce, but new projects continue to come online every other month, I would say, with new methodologies being created. Not only a huge variety of type of credits, but there are also a lot of price impacting factors in this market that we have to consider when we want to assess the price of all these carbon credits. We have seen the credit type. This is the main price impacting factors because the underlying cost, the cost of developing projects can vary widely between, for example, a renewable energy project or one of the most advanced tech-based carbon capture. Think, for example, of direct air carbon capture. We are seeing, for example, at the moment, renewable energy credits with a recent vintage, a 2021 plus vintage, trading in the market at around $2.50 per meter ton when they have a gold standard certification, a little bit lower when they have a Verra certification. But then if we look at direct air carbon capture, for example, we're talking about $600 per meter tons or more. BECCS credits are also quite expensive. We're around $250 per meter tons. So credit type is definitely one of the main price impacting factors, but then we also have the certification. As I mentioned before, gold standard renewable energy credits usually fetch a premium in the market compared to Verra certified credits. So the reputation of the certifier, if you like, but also how strict the certification process is, contributes to adding a premium to the credits that are certified under that standard. And typically, gold standard is the premium certifier in the market. We then have the role of co-benefits or social development goals. Projects with a higher number of social development goals usually trade at a premium in the market. And then, of course, the vintage, although this is something that usually creates some frictions among market players, we still see a big role of vintage being played in defining the price of a carbon credit. The newer the vintage, the higher the price. But there are many in the market that do not agree with the importance that the vintage is having in determining the final price of a credit. And then finally, geography. Depending on where the credits are coming from, so where the underlying project is located, credits can fetch different prices in the market. A typical example, for example, is credits that are coming from least developed countries usually have a much higher premium compared to credits that come from non-least developed countries. So we have these challenges. We have to consider the variety of credits out there, but also all these price impacting factors. So how do we assess the price of credits? Well, the solution that Platts has found has been to create a suite of price assessments. So it's impossible to have just one price for all carbon credits. We needed to create categories and to have a price assessment for each category. So if we want to go through this, and apologies about the formatting, something went wrong here while saving probably. You can see that we have two price assessments on the left side of the slide, CEC and CNC. Those two were created to capture the price on standardized contracts, the contracts created by exchanges. CEC captures the price of CORSIA-eligible credits, for example, the CBL Geo contract. CNC captures the price of nature-based standardized credits. All the others are there to capture the price of the over-the-counter market. And the key element to understand this is in the volume threshold that we have set. You can see how CEC and CNC have a small volume threshold, because those are the volumes that we see trading on exchange, on the exchanges, whereas all the others have wider volume thresholds. This market is still very much over-the-counter. 80% of the activity, roughly, is still happening in the over-the-counter space. And so some of these price assessments are really self-explanatory. Platts Renewable Energy captures the price of renewable energy credits, methane collection of all those credits that want to capture methane emissions and deliver them into the gas system so that the gas can be reused, and so on. You can see that there's a separation between standalone assessment and basket assessments. So what we have done with the basket assessments has been to create a sort of floor price for the avoidance segment of the market and one for the removal segment of the market. We have grouped some of these price assessments into an avoidance basket price, the Platts CAC, and some of them in the removal basket price assessment, the Platts CRC. A stands for avoidance and R for removal. What happens here is that the Platts CAC takes the price from the most competitive, the cheapest of the price assessment included in the avoidance basket. CRC also takes the price from the cheapest of the price assessments in the removal side of things. This was done in 2021 when we still didn't know how the market would have evolved, and so it seemed reasonable to offer a sort of granularity with all the price assessment that we created, but also a way of finding floor prices for the avoidance side of the market and the removal side of the market. 2 years later, 3 almost, I can say that the market has actually moved in the opposite direction towards further granularity. So instead of finding the floor price, market participants want to understand the price of different type of credits and also of specific type of projects out there. It's definitely a request that we are receiving and that we are addressing. And I'm going to tell you how we are addressing these question for more granularity. You can see that one of the efforts that we have done has been to introduce a sort of standardization. So we have introduced specifications like the volume thresholds that I mentioned, but also specifications around the vintages, for example, or the social development goals that we want to see in a carbon credit, for that carbon credit to be reflected into our price assessment. For example, in the household devices segment, we would reflect carbon credits with a 2020 to 2023 vintage and at least one social development goal involved in the project. Now, once we, apologies. After defining these specifications, what we said was, okay, we are going to assess each price on the most competitive credits that are meeting these specifications. And this is what we have done until July 2023. Slowly over time, we realized that this approach was, was not meeting the request of the market anymore. Market participants were not interested in the price of the most competitive credits. Thank you. This is very kind. Thank you. Thanks. Market participants were not interested in the price of the most competitive credits. They wanted to understand the price of credits that were fungible, that were exchanging hands every day in the market. And this not necessarily coincided with the most competitive credits meeting this specification. A typical example was the household devices type of credits. For example, the cookstove credits, which are the most popular in this category. The most competitive credits in this space that meet our SDGs and vintage specifications are cookstove credits coming from India. However, there are some concerns around the additionality of these credits, and the market was not interested in knowing the price of those credits because what everyone was trading was African credits with a gold standard certification. And so we needed to adopt a strategy. And what we did was to launch a consultation with the market and come up with reference bases. So we went to the market and we asked what were the credits that for each of our categories could be considered as competitive, so the cheapest, but also fungible. So credits for which there was enough demand and for which there was enough exchange in the market. And for each of our price assessment, we defined the reference basis so that not only we are offering prices for what the market is interested in, but we also increase the transparency of what our price assessments reflect. And you can see that House of Devices, for example, has a very clear reference base which is gold standard certified cookstove credits from Africa. Now, another interesting thing that setting these reference bases allowed us to do was to introduce differential. And this is how we're answering this question for further granularity in pricing informations. What are differentials? Differentials captures all the premiums and discounts that are there in the market. For example, keeping House of Devices as an example, we see that gold standard credits coming from least developed countries in Africa, for example, Uganda, often fetch a premium in the market. They trade at a premium because of the origin of the geographical location of the project. So we have to take in consideration these premiums and discounts when we assess the price of credits. And this is something that we do in our daily process, but what we are doing now is also to offer this differential as a price assessment. So you can see in the House of Devices, we have added the LDC differential. So this is a price, a number that we put out every day. And again, it's informed by the conversation that we have with sources. Differentials, so spreads in the market, tend to be quite stable compared to the underlying price assessment, but there are differences. They do change depending on supply and demand. Trends that are there in the market. Now, this slide is looking quite empty, and this is done on purpose to show that at the moment we have launched only 3 types of differentials. We have the LDC differential and energy efficiency differential for the House of Devices assessment, and we launched in September 6 vintage differentials for nature-based avoidance. With the vintage differentials, we want to capture the price difference depending on the additional vintage that a credit has. But the plan moving forward is to fill all the gaps that you see on this slide. And this is how we are answering these requests for further granularity without expanding too much the number of price assessment, of outright price assessments that we offer, because we remain committed to the mission that Platts has, which is to offer benchmarks, price references. So we cannot price the whole market. We need to find what the market needs and offer a selected number of assessments. Okay, let's have a look at the market trends that we have been able to spot in the market thanks to our price assessments. You can see here 4 of our price assessments. This is very small. I don't know what happened to the formatting. Can you read the names? I think it's impossible. Okay, so let's focus just on the general trends, and I'm going to read the names for you. These are 4 of our price assessments. The orange line that you see at the top captures the price of nature-based removal credits. And the reference base for this price assessment is given by afforestation and reforestation projects. And keep that in mind because we will get back to that. And then perhaps the other color that we can focus on is the blue line. And this is the price of nature-based avoidance carbon credits, for example, the RED+. Okay, so let's keep these two for now. It will be enough to go through the main trends. So one thing that is immediately clear is the price rise that we observed in 2021. 2021 has been the year where the voluntary carbon market became famous or known across a wide range of industry sectors, including the financial sectors. A lot of financial investors entered the market in 2021 and contributed to the rise in prices that we observed in the market. But then there was another important factor, which was COP26. COP26 really created a sort of momentum around the voluntary carbon market because that's when Article 6 was signed. And everyone saw in Article 6 a sort of a stamp of approval on carbon markets, including the voluntary carbon market as well. And so all those investors increased their positions and new companies entered the market. And then you can see how things started to drop. And they started to drop in February 2023, which is when February 2022, which is when the Russian-Ukraine conflict started. The Russian-Ukraine conflict created a lot of question marks in the market. That's when interest rates started to increase. It happened a little bit later during the spring of 2022, but it also posed a lot of questions. We were hearing during those days that many market participants were a bit skeptical about the commitments of corporates, the end buyers in this market, around their net zero targets. You remember that energy prices went to the moon during that period, and so many would think, okay, so corporates are now going to focus on how to procure the energy that they need and face the consequences of this energy crisis, and they would probably put their net zero targets to the side. And so many market participants, especially the financial investors, kind of put their positions on hold, or some of them left the market and invested in energy markets themselves, where there were more profit opportunities during those months. And then this sort of bearish trend continued over the summer. That's where the high interest rates kicked in. I think it was June 2022 when the Federal Reserve first raised interest rates. And with rising interest rates, it becomes more expensive for market participants to hold on to carbon credits. And then there's another factor at the end of 2023, which is COP27. COP27 was not a successful COP from the perspective of the voluntary carbon market, because many participants had expectations around Article 6 negotiations. They were hoping to have clarity around which methodologies would be allowed under Article 6, but none of that came. And so the bearishness continued. And then we come to January this year, and this is where the orange line and the blue line start to diverge. Let me repeat for you what they represent, because it's quite important. The orange line is nature-based removal projects. The blue line is nature-based avoidance projects. What happens in January 2023, I think it was the 18th of January, The Guardian published their article questioning the efficacy of 90% of RED Plus projects certified under Verra. And we saw that very clearly. It's really this drop that you see here. That happened exactly after the publication of that article. And the interesting thing here is not only the drop in price on the blue line, but also on the gray line, which is the price of household devices credits, cookstoves. But it's also the fact that the spread between the blue line, the avoidance projects, and the orange line, the removal project, starts to increase. So market participants move their position from the avoidance side of the segment, especially the nature-based, which is constantly under attack, and they move towards the nature-based removal side of the market. There's another interesting thing that happened, which is the gray line, which was really unexpected for us. While moving their position from avoidance to removal, some market participants, the yellow line, the renewable energy price assessment. You can see how the yellow line does not drop as much as the blue one or even the gray one. So while moving their position from nature-based avoidance to nature-based removals, some market participants also started to buy more renewable energy credits, which was really unexpected for us because you're probably aware of the fact that many renewable energy credits currently in the market comes from countries that are not the least developed countries, in countries where the technology to develop renewable energy projects is quite progressed, is quite cheap, and so there are a lot of additionality concerns around these credits. Nonetheless, market participants felt that it was safer to invest in renewable energy credits than to invest in cookstove or RED Plus credits, because renewable energy credits were not in the news. It's harder to attack renewable energy credits because somehow it's easier to prove the amount of credits that you can issue when you set up a renewable energy projects, rather than in the RED Plus space where everything is based on baseline and estimation. I have just one more slide, and then I have to close, unfortunately. Just another trend that we observed and that shows you where the market is going and what the market is thinking right now. This is a difference between, it's a spread that increases over time, and it's between, again, our nature-based avoidance price assessment, so RED Plus projects, and then the CNC price assessment. If you remember, it was one of the two prices at the top. CNC tracks the price of nature-based standardized contracts. So, for example, the CBL NGO. We really observed that while the bearish trend was there both on the OTC market and on standardized contracts, the price drop that standardized contracts observed was much bigger than in the over-the-counter market. And this is because, as it was mentioned in one of the panels before, standardized contracts, as they are designed now, they don't offer the possibility to the buyer to understand exactly what they are buying. And that's why the market moved away from those contracts and got more involved in the over-the-counter market. So much that at the moment we see activity kind of drying up in the secondary market, so where those intermediaries are there, where the traders and brokers are active, and we see end buyers wanting to talk directly to the project developer because of this need to really understand what it is that they're buying and making sure that their requirements for quality are satisfied and met. Okay, I have to stop here. Thank you very much.